About 2 years ago, I was browsing Les Fortunes on the 4th of July, and I came across a thread I found rather interesting. It depicted a setting that was pretty much completely based on a then Crusader Kings 2 mod, After the End, and how they could adapt it for what is a D&D setting. I was a big fan of the mod at the time, and well, still am, and obviously was getting into D&D throughout my experiences in college, and I thought it would be a good idea to kind of use this as a thought experiment. The thread did go on for a little bit that July 4th, but I never really saw another one or a follow-up. I had to kind of dig around an archive for it. But I did find a little bit, and I would like to kind of make a video explaining the setting and expand upon it with my own thought. Now, the first main question many people would obviously have is, if you're new to this whole idea, let's say you clicked onto this video the first time, is, well, what exactly is After the End about specifically? And, well, it is a post-apocalyptic mod, not unlike Fallout, but it's not a wasteland per se. Crusader Kings 2 is a game that is set, well, the main game is set in a medieval world, it's set in Europe, it's historical, blah, 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 blah. But this mod, it takes place in, well, North America after some sort of nuclear event, plague, hard to imagine, some kind of world-ending catastrophe. It's not exactly specified upon, but what is known is society is rebuilding, and while the ruins of the past exist, primarily the people are utilizing technology they've kind of redeveloped. And within the context of Crusader Kings 2, they're at more or less a medieval technology level, possibly below that, maybe even a little bit Renaissance. There's, relics of old that exist. It's set about 600 years after the apocalypse, so if you have a handgun or something like that, it's very old, it's a relic. Not many people would know how to service it, but that's what makes it sort of, almost a magical power in of itself. But it is a setting that's much more like in line with how you'd think of traditional D&D. Magic, well, doesn't have a place in the actual mod itself. It can very easily be written into the world and explained as to why fantastical races and events are happening. And I kind of have my own thoughts on how to adapt this. Now, the main thing that many people would kind of think would differentiate, a traditional setting that, while is fantastical, is more based on reality, and let's say the D&D setting is kind of the level of fantasy. If you're thinking more in line of let's say a Game of Thrones sort of setting where magic and creatures do exist, but they're much less touched upon, that's much more what the first After the End mod was set within. There was allusions to the fact that there might be some sort of mythical beings still in existence within the context of After the End 1. There was cults that worshipped basically Cthulhu, allusions to creatures that were skinwalkers, etc., of folklore, Native American folklore especially. But I definitely think this kind of can be further brought upon. I would love to keep these elements, and I do keep these elements in my adaptation of the setting alive, while still expanding upon it with traditional Dungeons and Dragons races. I like to be, have as much in there as you really possibly can fit, and I have a few ideas as to how that could actually be contextualized within the setting. First of all, you need to have, well, you don't need to have, obviously you can have a setting that doesn't have an explanation as to how these things have become this way, but within my own ideas, I believe that magic, the existence of these various races, can be traced back to, especially in After the End, the great catastrophe, whatever happened, or its immediate consequences. Now, at least I like to contextualize it as there is some sort of magical mishaps that happened after, nuclear detonation, collapse of infrastructure that caused not only the Yellowstone super volcano to erupt, but also just various, maybe even leakages of radiation, perhaps this plague that was released. But basically what I'm driving at is that as long as you can kind of contextualize your own origin as to why the setting has maybe diverged from, the traditional mod where no magic exists, no high fantasy creatures are easily available to be found, I think that kind of helps you kind of build things and go forward. I always like playing a Dungeons and Dragons setting where the game master has their own lore in mind and they're able to kind of pull from it easily, explain things kind of fluidly. Obviously, as a DM, you have to a little bit, be on the fly, learn some improv. But I do believe that there is a lot to base yourself on in the setting, in terms of just having consistency, knowing, maybe like drop some secrets as to like what's going on in the background of everything, why the world is the way it is. Obviously, you don't have to show your hand. I wouldn't play your cards all straight up at first. It's much more fun for players to discover why things are the way they are. But I digress. It works highly well as a D&D setting, and I think there's plenty of ways to build it as such, to spin this tale of America's sort of breakup into warring kingdoms and various tribes, and make it a very fun setting for someone to experience and kind of get into the first time without even really knowing anything about it. It's a setting that I've worked on and kind of thrown my own adaptations into, and I think that we can kind of get a good baseline of it for this video, and I'd actually like to make a few other follow-up videos explaining various like parts of lore on the regions in this world. So very briefly, I would like to kind of touch upon some of the larger areas within the setting that people would more or less play the most in. First being the East Coast. A major like faction, or more of a loose group of individuals, are the Americanist or Founders cult. They're people who believe that America should be restored. They're primarily based around Washington, D.C., but they have enclaves more or less all over the country, worshipping old American relics. They're very strong within, obviously, D.C. itself, Philadelphia. They have conclaves in like Mount Rushmore, Disney World. They're sort of a faction that a lot of people like to depict as being very high-tech. They have their own pseudo-papacy that's called the presidency, so you elect a new pope president. And they're very fun and easy to roleplay because they're just sort of American mythos alive. Within fantasy lore, I've seen a lot of people say that they could have like golems at their disposal that are like wax figures from like a museum or something that would depict like a president, and they've been kind of tricked out to be like war machines that fight as elite soldiers, and I think those are very fun to kind of utilize. The main adherents of this belief are focused, again, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia to New York. All of these regions would be fun to roleplay within. You can kind of do stuff with elections in all of these areas. A lot of like tomfoolery with relics, things like that. Another cool part of the setting you could definitely touch upon that has a lot of lore established is the Deep South / the South. In the setting, it is reunited under something that sort of does resemble the Confederacy. It's known as in the mod the Holy Columbian Confederacy. They're supposed to sort of represent almost like a Holy Roman Empire within the South. I did see lore in the actual thread I referenced where Flava Flavius was like the emperor of the South. In the mod itself, the South has a lot of infighting due to, I believe, religious schisms within the Protestant church within. There are people that kind of have developed bastardized beliefs in the South that are more like akin to like worshiping like cults, weird aspects of Jesus, snakes. The setting does have a lot of variants of Christianity that still remain. I know some players might not be comfortable playing within an actual religious setting, especially those who are, believers or not. I do believe you just have to have a mature table for this kind of discussion. I don't think it should be too big of an issue as long as you treat, religion, everything with, a degree of class. Try not to make anyone feel belittled. Obviously, you can kind of make fun of founders cults, whatever you really need to. That's all well and good. But I do believe the South will be fun to play at. If you really want to get serious, you can fight topics like racism, try to root out members of the Klan who are in hiding or whatever that still exist. Things like that would be fun to do, and I think would make for an interesting aspect of the setting. Obviously, there's various pagan tribes, and even in the South, there's Americanists that worship Walt Disney as an icon in Florida, and I think that would be a fun destination in Miami. It's just a side note, Orlando. Another very popular location that I think would work very well, especially for a beginning party within the setting, is New York City. Now, New York City within the existing lore is a merchant republic, so that means it is a city very akin to Venice. It is ruled by a class of patrician families who kind of have overseen the city for generations. I like to play it within my own setting as kind of a very cosmopolitan city, especially in terms of fantasy races. Now, two of the main houses that I think would always like to be kept unchanged from the existing lore is the Rothschilds and House Wayne. The Rothschilds, they could actually be descendants from, the real life Rothschilds, or, just kind of LARPers. But House Wayne, their figurehead is Bruce the Bat. He is the current ruling, more or less doge of the city. If this was Venice, he is a very vindictive character. He fights crime. He's Batman. The city is run by Batman as the leader. And he is the most powerful merchant class, which makes sense. Again, he's head of Wayne Enterprises in the Batman comics, head of House Wayne in the actual game. Then I also like to have a few classes that are kind of like a few merchant houses, that are based on dwarven families or elven families. Within my own lore, a lot of upstate New York is kind of run by various elven kingdoms, principalities. That makes sense, as a lot of the area there would be kind of regrown by nature, retaken. And I think it would make for an interesting dynamic of, New York exerts control over its immediate area, but would be at odds with clans of the north, the elves. Towards New York's northeast is New England, obviously. They deserve their own video, obviously. I'm not going to touch upon them right now, but basically they're worshippers of cults, all of them dedicated to basically Lovecraftian gods, Cthulhu of the like. And New York has to contend with all these things. They're technically a state that's run still by the Founders cult, but they're much more integrated with everyone else. Again, they're cosmopolitan. So they're kind of very loosely paying lip service to the founding cultists, while still being a major financial backer in some cases, as they're the wealthiest state on the eastern seaboard. Pulling many mercenaries. If you wanted to kind of go that route, many people would employ the player's party to actually do various odd jobs, and they could also be very highly involved within the trading of old world relics. There's probably plenty to do there. There could be magical barriers surrounding the cities, various races that come there to kind of do business. It's a good way to start the world, especially within a context of a more traditional D&D fantasy setting. So the final starting area I would like to mention would actually have to be California. California within the actual game setting, the Empire of California is actually rather fractured. It's sort of like how Imperial Japan or China was at one of their weaker states in history. The Emperor holds very little power, and a lot of the governors he's delegated more or less own their own kingdoms. That being within, the Valley of California, San Francisco, kind of like a northern buffer state, and then, SoCal. Within the setting, you could be helping the Emperor kind of regain lost powers. The various warlords or various governors really that own Californians, various sub-kingdoms, kind of do their own intrigue. My own ideas on how to make this area a little bit more fantastical is that there's a lot of beastmen presence kind of in between, let's say Utah and California proper, so in the deserts. Also kind of, they're fighting in the actual mod, they're fighting nature worshippers to the north. I think that translates well to a large rising elven kingdom that's kind of grown a rivalry to the various Californian states. Additionally, I think the actual Rocky Mountain area would be a good place for dwarves to exist as their own kingdom. Additionally, as a side note, Utah, which I believe also deserves its own video, would be run by the Mormon Church, who has also grown rather powerful after the collapse of America. So California has all these really interesting people to kind of interact with. It's a very good launch board as a starting location. And I think it would be a fun place to kind of begin your adventure, to learn the ropes, and still deal with all these wacky characters. I also think it's important to remember that a lot of the characters within these settings can be playful. You can kind of bastardize them from pop culture figures. A person I did forget to mention kind of for the Americanist is, I believe, Philadelphia is run by the Reynolds family from Always Sunny in Philadelphia, so you can always throw in pop culture references. Batman leads New York. I didn't even touch upon all the Gunsmoke cowboys that are in charge of parts of Texas. And you can really have fun with it. Feel free to throw in stuff you've seen in the internet. I kind of like the idea that there's a part of land that is the dogscape from that old story where, the land's literally covered in dog fur and shit. Obviously much more contained than that, but I think it would just make fun, times to do little references like that. Kind of like how Fallout does with their own Wild Wasteland perk. It kind of adds to the story. It makes fun little characters to interact with. It also helps you kind of contextualize who you're role-playing. If you know an established character and you want to throw them in the setting, I think that's a perfect way to kind of reasonably do things. Feel free to kind of have fun with it. Make your own people. Whoever you like from pop culture, it can easily fit within the setting, especially if they're from a certain city, what have you. So my main takeaway is if you'd like to see kind of more about this setting, like Lore explained, my own ideas of how to incorporate certain fantasy races, feel free to let me know. I'm probably going to I might make another video or two on my own, just kind of explaining certain areas, giving lore, giving my own thoughts on how to kind of bring in certain species or perks, whatever, from D&D. I've only DM'd the setting a few times, so I haven't always had to think everything out, especially in terms of game mechanics. D&D is fickle, but a lot of it is something you can kind of make up on the fly and homebrew as you go. But just let me know your thoughts. I'd be happy to hear anything in the comments. Let me know if there's a specific region of the country or character you'd like to kind of hear more about, or your own ideas. I'd love to see them as well. Thank you so much for watching. This has been Magoose Galoose signing off and on the loose. Bye bye.